Hi, it's Jeff Gottlieb with another episode of Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb. And I decided today, at this time yesterday, I had no idea what I was going to talk about. So I went home and I looked at my place to see what's running, what's working, what's interesting, what's going on. And the thing that was most interesting to me was my composting efforts. So we're going to do a show on compost. What is compost? Why do you care? What does it do? What does it do for you? What does it do for the world at large? What's going on? So, of course, I like to frame these shows in topics that relate to permaculture, primitive skills, and nature study. So this is a whopping hot permaculture issue. And we know that permaculture, what makes a project permaculture, or what makes concepts permaculture, is that they serve human beings, help the earth, and return a surplus to the system. So composting couldn't be a better poster child for permaculture ethics. And why? So what is composting? Composting is taking organic material and letting it decompose under optimal conditions to create fertilizer, basically, to create the important living part of the soil that allows plants to take nutrients and grow. So if you care about growing plants, even if you just have a regular sort of suburban house, a green lawn and a couple of bushes, this is a valuable thing. Your bushes will be very happy, your lawn will be very happy. And some of the other things I thought about looking into it from the permaculture lens would be some slogans that we use in permaculture to consider projects. And one is, the problem is the solution. And what we mean by that is, we could look at one small event going on and decide, uh-oh, that's causing a problem. But if we think bigger, we can find some way that that thing happening will help other things get done that we want. So it stops being a problem and it starts being a resource. So it's not exactly correct. The problem is not its own solution. The problem is a solution to other problems. So how does that inform us about composting? Well, if we think about it, you're in the kitchen, you're making some food, you taking the skin. Oh, I have some. No, I don't have some. Okay. What I thought I had was a bag with vegetable scraps. I had onion peels and a piece of rotten pepper and a couple of vegetable stems and a lemon rind and this and that, the other thing. The kinds of things that we would see coming out of our kitchen. Well, you could look at that and say, I don't want that. If I leave it around, it's going to stink. What am I going to do with it? I'll throw it in the garbage. Well, where does it go if you throw it in the garbage? It goes to the landfill. For many people in rural places around the country, when you put it in the garbage and it ends up in the garbage bag, you either have to bring this to the transfer station or to the dump yourself. It takes time, takes energy, takes gasoline, or they're going to charge you per bag to take it away. So you would save money and time and trouble if it didn't end up in the bag in the first place. So even something as simple as, well, I didn't make garbage. That's already a win. Okay, but what else do you get? All of those things, all of those kitchen scraps are biodegradable. What does that mean? It means that bacteria and fungi and living organisms will break it down. It will decompose and it will return itself to the system, so to speak. So that would be good if we could then use this product. So how would we use this product? Well, another permaculture principle that I like to think about is stacking functions. And what that means to me is that if you're considering an action, it's great if it can accomplish a number of things. I do this one thing and it does this, plus it does this, plus it does that, plus it does that. Okay, so composting, what does that do? Well, remember it's not going to the landfill, so it saves me money, time, trouble, and space. That's good. If you're thinking bigger picture, the less stuff that's in landfills, the less money our municipal, county, state, federal governments are spending tending the giant pile of garbage and using up land for that giant pile of garbage and spending money on staff to push around the giant pile of garbage. And then once we fill up all the space we have available, then we have to start shipping it to other states, other countries, other, if you're from New York, you might remember the garbage barge that left New York City and was turned away from ports all around the world. It was a giant barge with stinking garbage up to the sky, and it was kind of a media joke and not funny at the same time. So, anytime we can not put things in the landfill, we all win as a society. So, that's another one, and we didn't even help you at home yet. Okay, so what else? What happens when you take organic material and it decomposes? You get fertilizer. That's what you get. And fertilizer, it's real easy to assimilate into even the simplest gardening things. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to teach you how to get the best effects from composting organic materials and turning them into really, really great fertilizer that you're going to then immediately turn right around and feed to all your favorite plants. And even if all you did was take it out of the compost pile and just spread it around on the lawn and never look at it again, great. What you did in permaculture terms was you returned surplus to the system. And that's a basic ethic. Okay, so what are we doing? When we're composting, we are taking things that have a number of different chemical makeups, and we're allowing living organisms to break them down into their building blocks and colonized by the very simplest organisms. So what are the main building block things? We're dealing with things that have a lot of carbon, and those, we're carbon-based life forms, as we like to say. What else are carbon-based life forms? Well, just about every living thing on the planet. Trees, bushes, shrubs, low-growing plants, worms, cats, whales, plankton, bacteria, algae, kelp, you name it. If it's alive on the earth, it is very likely to be mostly carbon. And, in varying compositions. So we have a lot of materials where a lot of the other things have been kind of taken out of them. And what's left is mostly carbon. Stuff like dead leaves. Stuff like straw. If you look at it, it's not green, it's not alive, it's not fresh, it doesn't have a smell. There's not much in it except the basic building blocks. It's more or less inert. Well, that's great. So carbon-based materials, that's one of the really important components. As a matter of fact, we should have maybe 90% of what we're composting be chiefly carbon, dry brown stuff. The other stuff we could call the greens, and the greens include things freshly out of animals as well. So greens would be, well, lawn clippings, okay? So we cut our lawns, we got all this stuff. One thing you could do is leave your lawn clippings on the lawn and let them basically compost in place. So you're still composting. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's what the grass would like you to do. Okay. So there's that. And there's the weeds you pull out of the garden. Okay, this is mostly chickweed, a couple of plantains. I don't know what all I have in here. I pulled it out of my greenhouse because it was smothering my tatsoi plants. So, weeds. They're alive, they're fresh, they've got a lot of nitrogen, and that's the key nutrient that we're getting out of the fresh stuff. So, grass clippings, weeds, what else have we got? These are the outer leaves that I didn't need from horseradish plants. So whenever you're pruning, or whenever you're peeling vegetables, or whenever you're doing anything like that, you're going to have all this green stuff that if you leave it around, it's going to turn brown. But anyway, this is just basically leafy vegetable scraps. So those are some of the browns. Oh, look, here's the kitchen scraps. What have I got in the kitchen scrap? I've got a rotten pepper. I've got a squishy tomato. Oh, here's another important thing. Eggshells. They're really high in calcium. That's another valuable nutrient. Okay. Now, if you compost certain things, they may rot really fast, and other things may rot really slow. So eggshells are going to break down very slowly. So it's very smart if you crush them up into little tiny bits and then let them mix. So there's my vegetable scraps. What else have I got? Ah, the magic ingredient. This is rabbit manure. So, poop. Why is this so valuable? It's quite high in nitrogen. It's in a form that's readily available to bacteria, and it already has lots of different kinds of bacteria in it. So whatever else you have in your compost pile, if you put a whole bunch of manure in there with it, it will really get active. It will break down really well and make compost nice and fast with a great texture, and you'll get wonderful stuff. So rabbit is one of the best. See, the amount of nitrogen that's in manure can vary. If I were to take fresh cow manure, like just walk right behind the cow, scoop up just what the cow just dropped 5 minutes ago, and put it right in my garden, my plants would die. It's just too much nitrogen to give them too fast, and it will harm them. So it would be great if you could get manure that's much more moderate in nitrogen, and bingo, will I raise rabbits. So rabbit manure is one of the best. You could literally take rabbit manure and put it right underneath your tomato plants and your pepper plants and whatever else, and they would say thank you and grow like crazy. As a matter of fact, any animal manure that's in a kind of a grainy pellet like this, goat, sheep, anything like that, llama, alpaca, all really, really good fresh manures. Chicken, not so much. Chicken manure is very high. It's very high in nitrogen. It will scorch your plants. So these are all what we call greens. This is the live material that's going in your compost. Okay. Yeah, that's the greens. What would the browns consist of? Well, it's fall. Leaves. So when I say these are kind of dry brown materials, I don't really mean that they can't have water on them. It's fine if they're wet. Matter of fact, they'll rot really, really fast if they're wet. But what I mean is they're not alive. They're not fresh. So, yeah, leaves are fantastic. One of the things I like about leaves in your compost is they maintain some loft. They're a little fluffy. So, these are just poplar leaves that fell off our trees in the last few days. What else? This is old hay. It's spoiled. It was nice, sweet, high-quality horse hay, but it's not anymore right now. It's either mulch or compost, depending on what you do with it. Hay is not as inert. It actually has a lot of food value in it for the soil or for animals. Straw is more or less inert. Straw is kind of like the dead leaves of the plant stems. But hay is a great compost material. So the browns consist of leaves, hay, straw, and dried stalks of things. The greens are all these living materials. Now, we have to make a hospitable place for them to go about decomposing. What some people do if they're, starting to think about composting is they choose a place, and every time they have a little bit, they just kind of throw it in there. And you maybe use just what comes out of the kitchen. You're going to get a slimy, stinky mess that never really makes any compost. What are we shooting for? We want to make this. This is finished compost. It's black. It's a little bit grainy in texture. It's fluffy. It smells nice and fresh, like fresh garden soil. It is often full of earthworms and little critters that like to live in there. If you put this in your plant potting mixture, your plants would grow perfectly. You get great growth out of your plants. So this is the finished product. This is what we're trying to make. Okay. So, how do we make this? Again, if all you did was throw everything in a pile and not pay any attention to how much of this or how much of that, you would probably get decomposition of a kind you don't want. See, there are lots of different kinds of bacteria. And there are bacteria that work one way, and there are bacteria that work another way. There are bacteria that utilize a good amount of oxygen when they eat, when they break things down. And then there are bacteria that function just fine with very low to no oxygen. So aerobic bacteria and anaerobic bacteria. The anaerobic bacteria make stink. They make slimy messes that smell bad, and they don't make compost, really. What you want are aerobic bacteria. So what could we do to make sure there's air spaces in there? Well, we could put in materials that have a little bit of air spaces in them. The leaves, the hay, weed stalks, straw, things like that. So from the get-go, we've got some air just kind of worked in there. And that's great. So there are two ways to go about composting. You can take a lot of materials and build a compost pile that has just the right composition, and build it all the way up, fill it all the way up, and say, okay, I built it, and I just let it rot. That's a way to start it going really fast and let it rot uniformly and completely, and let you have all of it at one time. So your yield is, this many days after we put the pile together. All right? So that's what a lot of people do. And that's what people do if they're working on a very large scale. Okay? Like, I've seen municipal composting operations where they get all the leaves that people rake up and put on the curb in bags, and they make gigantic rows of leaves, and they take heavy equipment and they turn them every several days. And by the time spring rolls around, there's free leaf compost. You can come with your truck and fill it up. So I love that. That's a great idea. People might want to keep their own leaves and use them themselves, but if you're not going to do it, let the town do it. That's awesome. So that's if you build it all and you let it work all at once. The other way to do it is to pick out a spot, and because we know we're going to be generating kitchen scraps a little at a time, and we'll be weeding the garden a little at a time, and we'll be collecting manure from our rabbits one at a time, a batch at a time. So we may not have enough to make a whole stock. So as long as you keep the proportions reasonable, it should compost. So what that means is you'll have stuff on the bottom that's more mature than the stuff on the top. So you won't get it all at once. You probably will keep on going and keep on building until you fill it up. Then you're going to leave it. Okay. There are a couple of ways to set this up. You can take an area of land that you think you want to make into a garden, and then you can layer your materials on there. Some people call this lasagna gardening. And so what you're going to do is you might lay down layers of cardboard, you're going to put layers of mulch, you're going to put layers of manure, you're going to put vegetable scraps, you're going to put leaves, you're going to put all this stuff down, and then cover it over You could, some people will cover it over with black plastic. By the way, don't use clear plastic or white plastic, because if you do, you've just made a greenhouse and you will sterilize what's under it. So we don't want to sterilize our garden soil. We want it to be full of the kind of critters that are healthy. We want worms in our garden soil. We want little critters in there. Okay, so you could do the lasagna gardening if you wanted to do it all in layers on a large area. Or you could do a concentrated area. I took a picture of one of my compost piles. I'll show it to you. Okay, can we see that? So that is just 4 posts stuck in the ground and some woven fence wire made in a circle and stood there. That fence wire would stand there all by itself, but you could use chicken wire that's flexible as long as you fasten it to the posts. And then you throw in whatever it is you want. What's in there? Mostly weeds at this point. Oh, I forgot one more ingredient that would be valuable to talk about. Coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are great as a compost ingredient. As a matter of fact, they provide needed nutrients even if you were to sprinkle them around plants as a soil additive. You don't even have to compost them. So they'll work their way into the soil. But I get them from a coffee shop because, once they're finished making the coffee, they've got to get rid of the coffee grounds. So they're happy if somebody will take them away. So I'm happy to take them away. Again, it's, stacking functions. They want it out. I want it in. We make a deal. Everybody benefits. I love it. Okay, so coffee grounds are another ingredient. So what have we got? We've got, another one. If you know a brewery or anybody that brews beer, they're going to have bags and bags and bags of spent grain, they call it. And they've put it in the fermenter, whatever. They've sprouted the grain. I forget the technical terms, but they've got bags and bags and bags of grain that they're all done with. And it will, first of all, it's amazing chicken food. Second of all, put it in the compost. And it will serve you. So, okay. So what do we do? I don't know if I mentioned it, but we want about 90% browns, in other words, high carbon materials, and about 10% greens, in other words, hot stuff. Fresh manure, fresh grass clippings, weeds, vegetable scraps. So, lots and lots of leaves and straw and hay. Put a layer of something on the ground that is especially resistant to getting flattened and squished all the air out. So I like, old wheat stalks, corn husks, little twigs, things like that. And then I'll put down a layer of hay, straw, leaves. And then I'll put down some of the hot stuff, maybe a bunch of manure. And then I'll put vegetable scraps. And then I'll put hay over it. And then some coffee grounds. And then some more kitchen scraps. And then some more manure. And some leaves because it's fall now. Whatever it is I have, I just want to remember layers with browns, layers with greens, layers with browns, layers with greens. And just keep building it up. And when I have enough of it, you'll see that by the time, if it takes you a while to build this pile, 5 months, 6 months, by the time you are still putting stuff on the top and it's nearly full, the stuff on the very bottom is this. Stuff on the very bottom is already done. What some people swear by is that you have to periodically take a pitchfork and turn the compost over. There was a famous couple in permaculture, I forget their names, they can't be that famous, I guess, then, right? Where the husband swore by turning over the compost, and the wife said, it isn't necessary, don't bother, it's going to compost at exactly the same rate. So of course they had, this was great publicity. They made two compost piles side by side, and he turned one and she didn't turn the other. And I might have this backwards. She might have been the one that swore that you should turn them over. I don't know. So anyway, they composted at the same rate. So that may not be true for every set of circumstances and every compost mixture and every thing like that. But it does give food for thought. Maybe the hard labor way to do things isn't the only way you can accomplish this. So, if you don't need your compost to change into compost very quickly and uniformly, let's say all you really needed to do was get the leaves off of the lawn and put them somewhere for now, and someday you'll use them, great, fine. You're not in a rush. Just leave it in there. Right? So, maybe you do want to turn it over at least once, because a lot of times I've seen compost piles where the outer rim, which is exposed to a lot of air and gets dry, and the very top that's new is not rotted, but everything else is ready. So you might take that and pull it apart with a fork and turn it into a new pile, and then give it another couple of weeks and it will just go ahead and finish. So instead of turning them once every 2 weeks or whatever, I might turn a pile once if I think it's uneven. That brings us to a point. Moisture. If you have had really dry weather and you think that pile is dry from the outside to the inside, all the worms have left, all the beneficial insects are out of there. It's not, the bacteria are dormant. So you can go ahead and water a compost pile. They work the fastest in a place that is really warm but not that sunny. So if you have a place that's kind of, the whole area has a southern exposure, but you kind of have a tree over that section, wonderful. Oh, if you put your compost pile right underneath the tree will be taking those nutrients and saying thank you. So you may get less to take somewhere else if you put it right amongst living plants that are taking it. So you want to pick a spot where you get to keep it. One thing you can do, if you have an area that has a cement slab or a brick slab or something like that, and you build your compost on top of that, that's fine. You might think, how are the worms going to get in there? Well, two ways. You can inoculate the pile with worms. Once it's begun to rot at all, you can just rake up some leaves in another part of your yard and look underneath. Oh, it has some worms. Good. I'll take some of that dirt with the worms, put that in your compost pile. Great, now your pile has worms. The other thing is, on rainy nights, worms go all over the place. So don't worry, they'll go there. You could like try and keep worms out, and you won't be able to. They will find your compost pile and say, "Hey, we found compost," and they'll move into it. So it's great. All right. So that's the difference between building it all one or slowly filling it. It all works out the same. It's just a matter of time and uniformity. The build it all at once makes compost faster and makes it all about the same. So great. All right. How much time are we really talking about? If you got, okay, one thing that makes a big difference in how things break down is temperature. What you want is to have such a hospitable environment for these microorganisms that they all work at full speed to capacity. And what's going to happen is they will create heat. You can make compost piles that steam in cool weather. They are making so much heat. If you were to take a pitchfork, rip it open, stick your hand in there, you could conceivably be too hot to leave your hand in there. That hot. And this is really beneficial for a couple of things. One, it really speeds up how fast things change. Two, it kills off disease bacteria. So you might have the well-warranted caution that we're dealing with rotten stuff here. Is this safe to be around for people? And if it all came from vegetable material, yes, it's completely safe. I don't care if it's anaerobically rotted or whatever. Rotted vegetable matter, it has no human diseases in it. But when you start adding manure, chances are if you're dealing with manure from a vegetarian animal like a rabbit or a cow or a horse or something like that, it doesn't have any diseases we can get. When you deal with omnivorous animals like pigs or wild animals, or carnivorous animals like dogs and cats, now there are diseases people can get. So you could compost any kind of manure if you're good at making your compost piles get hot. If you stick a thermometer in there and your compost is 125 degrees in there or something, great. You can sterilize any kind of manure. Okay. So that's good to know, that you definitely want your pile to get hot. It'll come out. Will it come out with any bacteria in it? Yes, it will, because there are bacteria that like it that temperature. And so what happens in a compost pile is you'll have one set of bacteria that are prevalent early on, and then as things continue to rot and the chemical composition changes and the temperature changes and the texture changes, one set of bacteria will be, well, we don't like it here anymore and we're fading out. And the next group of bacteria will be saying, oh yeah, we love it here, let's breed. And the next group of bacteria will say, a couple of us can live here, but we'd like it to be a little more like it's getting. And so you get the day shift and the night shift and then the next day, so to speak. So you could test this throughout the life of the composting process and see the main species of bacteria change from one to the next, to the next, to the next. That brings us to a pretty amazing topic, a change the world sort of topic, and that is composting human manure. Getting near fresh human manure is how a whole lot of people get a whole lot of very serious diseases in the world. That's how you spread cholera. That's how you spread amoebic dysentery of all kinds. That's Montezuma's revenge if you go to Mexico. Really, really, really serious diseases. Some of them are protozoa, some of them are bacteria, all kinds of things. Everything from Giardia to Cryptosporidia, there's a whole list of them. And they're all really, really serious. But remember that process where the bacteria change one group to the next group to the next group? That works even if the pile doesn't get hot, as long as, one, you protect that pile from mixing with the rest of the world, and two, you give it enough time. How much is enough time? A year. I'll recommend a book, The Humanure Handbook. And I think it's a very valuable scholarly work on kind of the principles of composting and kind of manure recycling in the world and the bacteria process as things break down. It's about sanitation. It's about what we know about fecal bacteria that cause human diseases and what we know about the composting process. Really fascinating book. Really interesting. So you can do this. Is it legal? No. For the most part, no health departments in the United States will entertain the notion of anybody using these time-tested, perfectly functioning, useful, reducing waste techniques because they can't monitor it, they can't control it, and they can't be sure that you're going to do it right. So I understand why the legality is lagged way behind the practicality. But it is a real thing, and in some places in the world, it's a big, big issue. You have really high population, you have really poor sanitation. What are you going to do with all of the human poop? It would be really wise if you had a way to turn it back into fertilizer. Because the problem that goes with the high populations and the human poop is that the soils are depleted trying to grow food for all these people. So what's the best thing that could happen? You take this dangerous waste product and you turn it into fertilizer and you improve agriculture. So it goes right back to that. Okay, let me look at my notes here. Scale. Yeah, so you could make enough compost to be useful in a pile the size of a 5-gallon bucket. You could. And they make composters that are basically barrels. And you put your greens and your browns in the barrel, and then you just take the handle and you turn it over once a day. And that's it. And those work really fast. One, it's a black barrel, so it heats up, and that's good. And two, you keep the right amount of moisture in there so it doesn't, dry out around the edges or anything. So those things work great, but they don't hold all that much. Even if you get a big one, like a 55-gallon barrel that you could, now you're talking about having to turn a big barrel over. So you're probably better off setting up something. But so they make small scale things, and like I was mentioning, they do municipal sized composting of leaves and, lawn clippings and things like that. One thing I wanted to mention with lawn clippings. Okay, these are kind of long for lawn clippings. I just cut these out of my pasture. If you put these in the compost pile, they tend to mat down and force all the air out and go anaerobic. So they're going to end up clogging up the works, keeping oxygen from getting in, and not composting properly. So one of the things that they recommend doing is collecting the lawn clippings by bagging them. Run your mower over it and bag them, and sprinkle them with other materials. So don't use the whole bunch. Use some, and then some vegetable scraps, and then some more grass, and then a load of hay, and then some more grass and some leaves, and then some more grass, and then so if you do that. So again, it doesn't mat down. I don't mind because I never put that much grass in there. Plus, when I cut my field, I just leave it there because I let it compost right where it is. So scale's important. Something I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention a woman that had so many inspiring things to say about gardening and composting and how to do more with less, because she had younger folks helping her make videos into her 80s, and that's Ruth Stout. Ruth Stout was an utterly charming expert gardener, and the things that she had to say about gardening were just a breath of fresh air. What she would do is, in her very successful garden, would be to use heavy mulch and just take her vegetable scraps and just make a hole in the mulch and stick them in there. That's it. She didn't make dedicated compost piles. The whole pile on the garden continued to break down, and the bottom became soil, and then she would put new mulch on after a while, and the bottom would become soil. And she would stick, some, whatever, rabbit manure, apple cores, whatever it is, just stick them in there. So that worked for her. Okay. Animal helpers. This is one of my favorite subjects in composting. You kind of can't help it. If you make a compost pile and it's not sealed off, all the animals in the neighborhood are going to get interested in it. Sometimes that's bad. Like, you might be putting food scraps in there, and every stray dog in the neighborhood is going to come and try and dig a hole in it. The raccoons are going to come and unearth what you've put in there. Things are going to mess with it. If you find that's a problem, one thing you can do is just make a well-fitting cover. Another animal that's a big problem with compost would be bears in our area for sure. And pretty much whatever you can do with your hands to close it off, a bear can undo with its paws in about a quarter of a second. So the only thing you can do with bears is close things with lids that are, commercial closed lids, bins and screw tops and stuff like that. But I was thinking about little animals. If you just put your compost pile in place, like I said before, if you didn't have worms in it, soon you will. and they're going to help you. What do worms eat? They eat decomposing plant matter and the bacteria and the fungi in the soil. So what they do is they chew up the soil with all the organic matter in it, and they pass it through their digestive systems, and it comes out the other end as worm castings, we call it. So if you're ever in a place where there's that many worms that they have left enough castings that you can scoop it up and take it, it's fantastic fertilizer. It's better than any large animal manure because it's absolutely perfect for plants. So if you got worms in your compost pile, great. The worms are kind of like the bacteria. Remember I said the bacteria, they work in shifts. This group is here, and then if they don't like it anymore, they leave, and the next group comes in. The worms are like that too. There are actually a number of species of worms that like compost piles, and the one that stays the longest and does the most work is what we call red wigglers. And you can buy red wigglers. People use them for bait. People use them as worm composters. The worms will do this work for you very, very fast. If you were to take a plastic bin, I don't know if you can see this one, it's a plastic bin. You want one with a better fitting lid than this. This one just kind of closes. Otherwise, your worms will crawl around and they will come out. And, you know, they're harmless little things, but you really don't want them all the way across your kitchen floor. And then you have to go get them and bring them all the way back over and put them back in. You know, no harm done, but, you know, you don't want to hurt your worms either. One, you paid for them. Two, they're helping you. So you put the worm bin with some inert material like shavings and shredded newspaper and whatever, and you put your coffee grounds, food scraps, weeds, things like that in there, and the worms are voracious. They will just eat your greens and browns and leave you worm castings in no time at all. So it's actually a way to compost where you never have to go outside. You can do it under the kitchen sink, and it works great. So otherwise, if you're counting on the worms to help you outside, once it starts to get cold, they leave your compost pile, they go deep into the earth, and they go dormant. So no worms are helping you in January, unless you live in, you know, South Georgia or someplace where it's way above freezing. So the worms are great, and they work really fast, and they do a lot, and the product that they make really helps. So it doesn't have to be compost made by rotting. It could be compost made by animal processing. It's good. It's maybe even better. Considering how valuable it is to put manure into your composting process, what if it was part of the breaking down thing? You'll also have insects that visit your pile and do lots of work. I am delighted when I look in the summer into my compost and I see black soldier flies. Oh, a little spider. Somebody else that's interested in the insects in my compost. So the black soldier flies are really amazing insects. The adults don't feed, they don't eat anything. The larvae have their dinner bibs on, they've got their knife and fork, they are ready to eat, and they will eat any sort of organic material. They're in my compost pile. They love the coffee grounds, they love any kind of manure, they're underneath my rabbit cages eating the manure. They are just busy, busy, busy guys. You could put a bucket of stuff, and if there's some black soldier flies in it, you could throw some stuff in there in a mound, and you go back 24 hours later, and it's leveled and lower, because they have just been churning and working and eating and pooping and growing and moving and eating, and holy cow, these little guys work like demons. And unfortunately, they don't want to be around in the winter either. So it's the 10th of October. Pretty soon the black soldier flies are going to quit for the year, but they got a lot done. We had a warm spell all through September and into October so far this year, and so my black soldier flies are still busy, busy, busy. So they get more done in a few months than regular decomposition does in many months. So those little things helping. All right, what if you're in a suburban or rural situation? What else could help you compost? Chickens. You could take the vegetable scraps, the weeds, the grass clippings, and just throw huge amounts of them in with your chickens. And they will eat everything, poop all over it, and scratch it all up and mix it together. You couldn't ask for better soil treatment. Not only that, while they're at it, they're eating the beetle grubs and the soil pests that eat your garden. So what I do with my chickens is I fence them in an area. I let them eat all the greens that are there. I give them tons of weeds and other kinds of foods. They scratch it, they poop on it, they eat everything, and then I move the whole cage over. And then they get to work on a new area. And then I make a garden bed out of that area. And it works great. That's where I grew my white potatoes and my sweet potatoes and my okra and my peppers. And they are being thrilled. And some squashes too. So there are people that do what's called a chicken tractor. And the chicken tractor is not fixed to the ground. It has wheels. So you plunk it down where it is by rolling it there, and the chickens can reach the ground, and you give them mountains of compost, every kind of vegetable scraps and whatever, to the point where it's like the chickens are climbing up mountains of compost, and they process it all, and when they look like they've got a handle on it, you move the chicken tractor. It has wheels. You roll it. It's not too heavy. And it has their sleeping house, their chicken house, and their roosts, and their protection from predators. So you're good. And they will process compost really fast because they're just eating it and digesting it. And a chicken weighs, 3 to 6 pounds, depending on what kind of breed it is. Man, a 3 to 6 pound bird eats a lot of food. So the chickens can help you. Turkeys could do the same thing, especially if they're going to, scratch and look at it and scratch and look at it like they do. So it's great. So what are the implications? What is this actually going to accomplish? Well, one of the things that happens if you grow food in the same place year after year is if what you're growing is food, you're taking the finished product away and you're eating it. Now, when it goes through your body and it creates human waste, are you letting that go back to the land, or is that going into the sewer and leaving the system and never coming back? In which case, you're stealing from the soil, and you're stealing from the soil, and you're stealing from the soil, and you're stealing from the soil. It's getting worse and worse and worse. So, what could we do? Well, we can buy chemical fertilizers. But if you look on the bag of chemical fertilizer, it's going to say NPK. It's going to have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And plants need those things. That's the main parts of what plants are asking for. But that's not the only thing plants are asking for. They need calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, all these other trace minerals. And they need living bacterial systems, beneficial nematodes, beneficial insects, things like that. So if all you ever did was go buy bags of fertilizer and put it on the soil, you may grow plants, but they will have less nutrition in them, worse year after year after year. And when they're less nutritious and they're getting less of their trace minerals, they're more susceptible to attack by insects and diseases. So then we start putting more chemicals on them to kill the diseases and the pests. And now you've got poisons on top of weak plants, which are no longer nutritious. Hello, welcome to what you can buy in the supermarket. That's what's in the supermarket. And that's precisely why. It's a little jumping spider. I love those guys. They're like tiny little mountain lions. Yeah. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that's compost. Whether it's small scale or large scale. The answer to that is utilizing all of the trace minerals that are available in all of these resources. And even bringing resources from outside, like when I go get the coffee grounds from the coffee shop. When we buy food from somewhere, but we use all the scraps and put them in the compost. When, and nature imports from elsewhere. If birds fly over and they eat things on your land and they poop and that ends up in your compost, great. I'm raising rabbits, I do give them greens that are grown on my land, but I also buy commercial rabbit food. So that's an input from elsewhere too. So I'm actually importing nutrients of all kinds from other places, things that I planned on, things I didn't plan on, and it all goes in my compost. When the compost is all finished, I'm watching I'm watching little critters in the rabbit manure here. There are all kinds of bugs there. Earwigs and... Wow, it's busy. Yeah, put them in a clear plastic bag, and that way you can watch things going on. Yep, a lot of critters in there. I'm glad it's a sealed bag, otherwise they would be all over the studio. So, they're all helping. Why are they all in the manure? Because they're eating, they're breaking it down, and they're making it even more, here's the word, bioavailable. That means that living things can take it up into their bodies. Just because there are all these different minerals in the soil doesn't mean that the plant can get them. Unless there's also a living, healthy fungal layer and bacterial layer and tiny little organisms in the soil. And those are kind of locking up those nutrients in a form that the plants can absorb. So we need living soil. Compost is the best way for living soil. We're living, we need to be living with other living things. Compost is, compared to chemical fertilizers and then weed killers and other things, chemical fertilizers as is are toxic to human beings. You don't want to be anywhere near that stuff. You don't want to be anywhere near the things that they use to kill the insects. You don't want to be near any of the fungicides. You don't want to be near any of the other sprays that they put on commercial crops. Do you want to be near compost? Absolutely. Compost is great. So when I finish making a batch of compost, they're like this. And this was just a little sample I scooped up. I'll have, from this pile, I'll have 3 wheelbarrow loads of good compost. That's just one pile. I have 6 piles on my place. So when I'm done, at the right time of the season, I will take that wheelbarrow over to a garden bed and I will just spread it out on the surface. And then I will cover it with mulch. What's the difference between compost and mulch? Well, mulch is not put on when it's rotten. It's put on when it's basically brown, carbon-filled material, and that's the blanket. That's the protection from the soil drying out, from the soil organisms going elsewhere because they can't stand it being so hot and dry. That's what keeps the weeds down. That's what slowly but surely rots and gives itself to the soil too. So between the compost and mulch, life is good. And since these are free, this is going to be the solution in places around the world where they're in a cycle of debt and poverty and poor health and overcrowding. And with all of those things, almost forced on them by people that are coming from around the world and quote unquote advising them. And why are they advising them? So that they'll buy products. Well, compost is kind of unpopular with large corporations because it doesn't make anybody any money. But it can save you money. And it can increase a community's resilience and a community's physical, bodily health. And I believe in it. I love composting because I love to see things go from a state where you can't use it to a state where it's valuable. It's almost like compounding interest. It's like you put your money or your energy or your materials, in this case, into a system that turns it into something more and more and more valuable. And what could be more valuable than something that not only grows food that makes you healthy, but keeps you involved in the cycle so that you're happy. I don't know about you, but when I can see the results of my actions and they're working, and I have a good idea, and I put it into place, and it's doing what I expected it to do, and it's saving me money, and it's saving me energy, and it's improving the quality of my food, and it makes my place look beautiful, and it improves all my plants, and all of the native birds come by more. I mean, if any horse gets loose in my neighborhood, they break out of their fence and they come over and start grazing in my place because I have the best grass and the best plants of anywhere in the neighborhood because nobody else in my neighborhood is taking care of the soil like I am. I was lucky. I started with good soil, but I'm trying to keep it that way. So anyway, that's just some thoughts about composting. And like many of the concepts that we've played with in this show, I like how they're, I don't want to use the word subversive, but I like how they kind of run their own systems and they don't require plugging into the systems at large. And they're also historical, and they're also educational, and they're also very satisfying, and they help everything and everybody. So we'll just add it to the list. So keep stuff rotting. Your life will be better. And it keeps coming back to that at the end of all my broadcasts too. If you do this project, your life will be better. So that's Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb. And we'll see you again. I have an announcement. I am about to launch a website. So I'm hoping that you will check out, I believe so far the title is going to be theprimitivenaturalist.com. So look for us. It'll have references to this show, links to be able to see old episodes. It will show you my books and my crafts that I have for sale and ways that we could work together. I can come to your site and do educational programs of many kinds. You'll read about them and build primitive house replicas and things like that. So yeah, check out The Primitive Naturalist. And if you're interested in crafts, at the end of November, Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend, I'll be teaching a gourd craft class. Take basically garden produce, you grow them in the garden, they grow a hard shell, you don't eat them, and then you dry them and you turn them into boxes, canteens, musical instruments, toys and games, bowls, plates, cups, and spoons, any sort of thing you can imagine. It's really fun. They're beautiful, and you could create heirlooms you want to hand down to your grandchildren. So that will be at Earth Haven Eco Village through Culture's Edge. So if you look at Culture's Edge and their website, you will find that program, and you'll be able to get more information and sign up for it. So I hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody.